Bales. He is an actor, member of the of SAG-AFTRA Actors Equity. He's a member of SAG-AFTRA's Washington Mid-Atlantic Local Board. Colonel in the U.S. Army, retired. This guy's everywhere and into everything, and some great roles that I saw. Elliott, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate the time.
So let me start where we are. Where are things right now with negotiations? Anything happening? Are we anywhere closer to this coming to an end? Anything?
Not at this point, and I'll speak from what I see in our communications with the national organization. We've been at this for 3 weeks. We left when they did not come to an agreement after giving them a 12-day extension, and they have not returned to the table or offered anything else.
So is the sense on your end, what I've had others tell me, that it's rumored that an executive said we're just going to starve them out until they lose their apartments and they go broke, and then they're going to come back begging? Is that kind of the sense, since there have been no negotiations?
Yeah, that was a statement made by some anonymous executive during the WGA strike before we even walked out. So that does seem to be a bit of the sentiment. I think there's a huge disconnect between people on yachts and at billionaires camps and those of us who are lunch pail, hard hat wearing actors who just work for a basic wage when we get to.
Now it's interesting that you frame that like that, because when you talk to people, they think actors are everyone's Tom Cruise or Matt Damon, people making 17-figure salaries. But the reality is most of the SAG-AFTRA members, they're just working people trying to eke out an existence, right?
Right. So to qualify just for our basic tier of our health plan, you have to earn a revenue in SAG-AFTRA contracts of $26,470 in a year. 87% of our members don't even make that much. So that's in companies that make hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue. So that there's a little bit of a disconnect there. But yeah, no, we're not all from. Every time you see the word Hollywood, that's not who we are. Although we do have some great members who have walked away from very lucrative and expensive contracts. Those folks who do make millions, they're out with us as well. They're not working either. But it's really about, and they will tell you, this is about the journeyman actor. This is the person who gets up at 5 a.m. and shows up at a set and is there all day long in the heat and the cold. So that's really what this contract negotiation is about.
Now, what's the sticking points? I've heard a bunch of stuff, in the media. I've heard a bunch of statements. What do you see as what's the holdup? What's being done here?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the two things that I think are at core that I think people will feel an understanding relationship to is pay and protection. 23% inflation over the last 6 years. And our contracts for 3 years and were fixed before that. So throughout the pandemic, we were set just a little over 2% a year. Obviously, inflation was much more significant to that. So right now we're making less than we would have made in 2020 in terms of real dollars. And so that sort of catch up, we've said, hey, catch us up in year one, and then we can go back to what we hope will be the rate of inflation. It's not tied to anything. And that's, we've come down, the negotiating team's come down from what they asked up front, and the other group hasn't moved at all. So there's just an unwillingness to recognize the plight of every American worker. I think that's across most working unions and most labor organizations today. And the second is protections. We see a growth in artificial intelligence. And that's not just about us. That's about, I think, every working American and every person who lives in this country. Your images, your voice, your photographs of your food, your photographs of your kids and your cats and your dogs are being taken by media corporations and used without your consent or without compensation to make them more money. And so they've actually put into their proposal, as we've talked about, hey, we want some constraints on that. We want some constraints on how you use our image in future technologies. And they've said, okay, we'll give you half a day's pay and we'll own your image and likeness in perpetuity and never pay you again.
Wow.
And not give you your consent for what we use it for. And we've just said, that's a hard no.
Yeah, that is a hard no. I mean, the fact that, they can slap your face on anything is pretty remarkable. Now, you talked about the pay part of this. 26 grand a year. I'm sorry, that's not. I don't see that as a living. considering that, when you're pushing for a minimum wage of $15 an hour, which is what, about 31.2 a year, you're well below what any reasonable person would consider even a minimal existence.
Right, which is why I think the huge joke is on some executive that would say we're going to starve you out, because we're all doing other work. We're all doing other jobs. I mean, we have built careers to be able to allow us to tell these stories that are so important to everybody. Look at how we got through the pandemic. If you couldn't go to work, or you were stuck at home and couldn't go out, you watched television, or you listened to music, or you watched movies, and that was the work of our members. And we didn't work for those intervening years while those companies made record profits. So we just want, let's be honest, and let's say, hey, let's get us to the point where everybody can afford to have health care, pay their rent, put a roof over their heads, and feed their families.
Let's talk about that for a second, because the streaming services, obviously were huge during the pandemic, and as you pointed out, made a huge amount of money. I've got a friend who keeps telling me, well, they're just being unreasonable with the streaming services because the streaming services are new. And I'm going, I don't think so. I think they're not new, and I think they're wildly profitable. And I don't know that they're accurately telling us how many people are viewing this stuff. So is streaming, is that a huge part of what's going on, especially with the writers? Do you see that in your contract fight too?
It is, because we have allowed it to be treated as new media, going all the way back to Netflix about 10 years ago, and going back to HBO before that. We've made allowances in the past for new media companies to come in and try and change the market and get more work opportunities for our members. What we found now is it's 10 years ago since Netflix won an Emmy for House of Cards, and that's when they kind of exploded. The lack of transparency about how many subscribers they have and what the model is for residuals. And I think that's the toughest thing for people to understand, is that in 1960, we kind of took and changed our pay formula from just being the session fee per day to also include contributions to our health and pension fund, which was created then. And then this concept of residuals, realizing that there would be a chain down the road, whether it was reruns on linear television, or it was usage and views on streaming services, or it was re-release, or how many theaters that it showed in across the country and across the internationally, that we would participate in that revenue stream for as long as that work continued. And that's the second big part of our pay piece. It's a big component of who we are, is that we've agreed to take less over time to get those residuals. And that's
so you're investing your time and your talent in the hopes that it's going to pay off long term. Right. So that actually saves the studios a boatload of upfront costs, which means a lot more things can be done. It sounds like, again, the working people are doing the sacrificing, making the concessions, and the well-to-do keep walking away with more and more. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show with Elliott Bales. He's an actor and member of SAG-AFTRA and Actors Equity. You want to check out his website, elliottbales.com. We'll get links out on social media how you can do that. Now, I do want to get to this AI thing, because, I see this as that first fight, that first little battle of what the war is coming, and that's most of us being replaced at some point by automation or robotics. So however I see your fight right now happening, I think sets the tone for all the rest of us, be it a dumb truck driver like me who's worried about at some point in my lifetime there will be no drivers behind the wheel, to to lawyers and doctors and who knows. So what you're doing, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is really the first battle that you don't have a choice but to fight.
It certainly impacts directly right now the technology that's available. If you've got an aging parent like I do, whose Facebook account has been spoofed, and her image and her voice and her pictures have been taken to try and get somebody to give them money, we're already there. We've been there for a while now, and that's just a simple example. But the technology is getting more and more advanced and evolved. And so I see this both. We've said all along, this is not an entertainment dispute. This is a labor dispute.
Right.
This at its core is a fight for every worker. And I believe that it goes all the way to the Congress of the United States, because I think this is a legislation issue. How do we protect the rights of Americans? In 1996, Congress passed HIPAA. And that said, they can't give, nobody, no doctor can give away your medical information without your express consent every time they do it. That's the same place we need to get to in terms of how we control AI, which is here, and then we use it. We're using AI right now to talk and to broadcast and to take pictures and make phone calls. And we appreciate those things that it brings. But how do we protect our privacy? How do we protect ourselves? And how do we protect our jobs going into the future?
That is the question, and AI is going to be a huge part of this future. So, what do you want people to know? I mean, at the end of this, you are right, 100%. This is a labor issue, and I don't think I've ever framed it as an entertainment issue. This is people trading hours of their life for wages that support their family. At the end of the day, I don't care what you do, from being an actor like you to a truck driver, a street sweeper. You deserve to earn a reasonable life-sustaining wage, and we should be fighting for that. But what do you want folks to know? What's the message that if you had the 30-second elevator speech to give to somebody, what is that?
I think that it is that we are a part of the American labor movement and the restoration of the strength of American labor in the United States. Far too long, we've allowed large corporate organizations and their CEOs and institutional investors to control American life, and thereby by controlling the American worker and what they pay and what they don't pay, and by creating political systems that allow them to do that. I think it's time for some of that to be reversed, and to restore that to those powers and those authorities and those protections to every American and the American worker, because that's how the country survives and thrives into the future. And so I think that's the biggest thing for me is we have some beautiful and well-spoken people that get a lot of attention. They're celebrities, and we're using them, and we hope that that's a message that comes through. At the same time, you're going to see a lot of stories, because the same people who control most of the large news media organizations are the very same employers that we are trying to negotiate against. So a lot of the stories will be coming in the next few weeks, and already are now, about some internal struggles and internal strife. We're in the middle of a labor election, which happens in most labor unions at some point. And so we're going to have some of that, but we're like siblings, like all siblings are. We're going to scrap, we're going to fight, we're going to argue, we're going to talk about this piece and that piece. But at the end, it's all about taking down and bringing to the table for a true negotiated deal those yacht riding, Ferrari driving, mansion and dwelling executive.
Yeah, it's all about getting what you earn. You mentioned the studios getting bigger and all this. Is consolidation a huge problem in your industry?
I think we're kind of at the end of that. Part of the big problem they brought to the table, and it's a reasonable one, is they all jumped into streaming without a plan, without a good, thorough business analysis. I'm an entrepreneur. I have to do analysis for my business. I have to know what I can afford and what I can't afford. And they've all jumped in, and they've extended themselves too far. And now the market's flooded. And so it's why you see Bob Iger at Disney saying, "I'm going to sell ABC. I'm going to sell ESPN. I can't. It's away from our core business."
Go ahead.
So I think we may be on the verge of kicking things out and breaking things up, and I think we would love to see that happen.
That'd be a good thing. Lastly, a moment ago you brought up senators, and you brought up some political stuff. Have you gotten much support from the politicos? Joe Biden says he's the most pro-labor president, at least of my lifetime, and I say he is. So anything there? Any help?
I think we're a little early in the process of striking to get to that point yet. But I will say, I think a perfect example is something called the Performing Arts Tax Parity Act, which is a bill that has been in the House since 2014. It has 51 co-sponsors as of today. I'm leading one of the teams with Actors Equity to try and get this passed, and they are bipartisan. There are Republicans and Democrats that are on board saying this is important. We need to take care of these folks who spend 20 to 30% of what they make just getting the next job. And so that's the kind of support we're getting. More people are signing on to that every day, and we hope we'll get that through. And I think that's indicative of the kind of support.
That's the marching order. Elliott, I appreciate you taking some time filling us in. I hope you'll come back and give us some more insight as this hopefully goes on a very short period of time. I fear it's going to be a long one. But I hope you come back and talk to us again.
Thanks, Rick, and thanks for taking the time and representing American workers well.
Appreciate it. Thanks.